Have you ever been told that you're too sensitive at work, or that you're overreacting, or that it's all in your head? Have you ever raised concerns only to be told that the same thing happens everywhere else and that it's just the way we do things around here? If so, you may have been gaslighted. This is part of a spectrum of bullying and emotional and relational abuse that can be endemic in today's workplace. In this episode, I'm joined by James Costello, a psychotherapist, researcher, and author of the book Workplace Wellbeing, a Relational Approach. We talk about the insidious ways that organisations and individuals can undermine us, causing us to have to do extra emotional labour just to cope with workplace dynamics. And we talk about what happens when authority and power is misused and some of the disastrous consequences it has on individuals and for teams, and what we can do about it. So listen, if you want to find out the many forms that relational abuse can take, and what to do if you suspect that you or a colleague might be a target of gaslighting. And listen, if you want to find out the secret formula that psychotherapists use to help people flourish and grow, and how you can apply that in your work. Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, life hacks for doctors and other busy professionals who want to beat burnout and work happier. I'm Dr. Rachel Morris. I'm a GP turned coach, speaker and specialist in teaching resilience, and I'm interested in how we can wake up and be excited about going to work no matter what. I've had 20 years of experience working in the NHS, and I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed, worried about making a mistake, and one crisis away from not coping. Even before the coronavirus crisis, we were facing unprecedented levels of burnout. We have been described as frogs in a pan of slowly boiling water, working harder and longer, and the heat has been turned up so slowly that we hardly noticed the extra long days becoming the norm, and have got used to the low-grade feelings of stress and exhaustion. Let's face it, frogs generally only have two options: stay in the pan and be boiled alive, or jump out of the pan and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. You have many more options than you think you do. It is possible to be master of your destiny and to craft your work and life so that you can thrive even in the most difficult of circumstances. And if you're happier at work, you will simply do a better job. In this podcast, I'll be inviting you inside the minds of friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this, so that together we can take back control and thrive, not just survive, in our work and our lives, and love what we do again. Before we get to this week's episode, I'd like to let you know about some free online training for doctors that the Joyful Doctor, Dr. Caroline Walker, and I are running in the next few weeks, with some practical strategies designed specifically to support doctors in challenging times. This is for you if you feel that the demands of your work are increasing, along with its impact on the rest of your life. This is for you if you wish you had a way to press pause and take stock without letting your colleagues or your patients down, and if you'd love to feel energised, fulfilled and inspired by your work. So we'll teach you 2 instant techniques to stop the overwhelm so that you feel calmer and love your job again. We'll share 3 simple strategies you can implement today to help you thrive at work even when you're stretched, and we'll introduce a fun and easy way to grow your resilience and boost your energy so you can ditch the dull and expensive CPD. To sign up for this webinar totally free of charge, then do click the link in the show notes below. And please do share this with your friends and colleagues and anyone else who might be interested. So on with the episode. So it's brilliant to have with me on the podcast today, Dr. James Costello. Now, James is a psychotherapist and he is a researcher. He works at the University of the West of England, and he's recently written a book called Workplace Wellbeing, a Relational Approach, which is just fantastic, published by Routledge. And he really specialises in relationships at work. And in fact, you said to me just now, Jim, work is relationships.
That's right. Yes. I think that very often comes as a bit of a revelation for people who I speak to. It's, oh my goodness, yes, it is. I mean, relationships have the capacity to make us joyful, give our lives meaning, but also they can make us pretty bloody miserable as well. So, and I think we have that whole spectrum in the workplace.
And one of the reasons I wanted to get you on the podcast today, amongst loads of other reasons, is that I'm increasingly getting frustrated with what I call the fruit and bicycles approach to well-being and resilience, this sort of attitude that if we provide a fruit bowl for everybody, give them some fresh fruit, and perhaps we give them a cycle to work scheme, then they're going to be all right. Because it's really dreadful working here, but we'll just put a sticking plaster and maybe do a yoga session at lunchtime, which they can attend in their own time, in between those extra things that they have to do, and that is our responsibility towards well-being.
I call it the soothed disengagement approach. When I've spoke to medical professionals in preparing for the book, I heard people say an awful lot. I don't want to be put into a room for half an hour to be silent and just forget how crap my job is. Oh, sorry, can I say that word in your book?
Say anything in my podcast.
I actually want what happens outside the room to change, and I don't want to be soothed and disengaged. But don't get me wrong, I think there's a place for fruit, and I've just recently used the cycle to work scheme to buy lots of bicycles for my family. So I think they're good. But it has to be, in context. And, I'm going to say more about that later because it sounds like it bothers you. I know it bothers me.
Well, it does bother me because I'm one of those people who provide this well-being and resilience training. So, and I'm just about to provide it for a year for a great big hospital trust. I run courses on resilience for doctors, all these sorts of things. And I guess the one thing that I've noticed that the biggest barrier to well-being and resilience isn't that people don't know what to do. It's that they don't have the time to do it, and that there are issues in the workplace that get in the way and that are real barriers for people. So I think the fruit bowls and the cycle to work schemes and the well-being and the mindfulness and the yoga and all that is vitally important, because actually you need to stay well to give your best. So these individual resilience skills, massively important, and it's what I do. And the workplace is just as important, and that's why I sort of wanted to do a load of podcasts actually around how we make workplace better, because there's some stuff we can do, there's some stuff we can't do, but I think just acknowledging it in the first place is really important. And what I loved about your book is that you're talking about people. It's about people, it's about the relationships, and we can't abdicate responsibility, but neither can our leaders in our workplace either.
I guess the reason why I got so interested in the workplace, a long time ago I was working as a workplace counsellor in occupational health unit of a large hospital here in Bristol, and I started to get quite frustrated. There's this metaphor of seeing all the people in the river shouting for help, and you wade in and you pull someone out and you give them CPR and you dry them off, and then you throw them back in again. And from upstream, there's more and more people in the water waving for help. And it gets very, we can set up really big, clever organisations that dry people off and spruce them up and give them some CPR, but then throw them back in again. But I just felt it's time to go upstream and find out what's happening to this. Why are all these people falling into this kind of emotional, torrential sort of process that requires them to be, mollified by some kind of soothed disengagement? So I guess that's also what interested me in activism as well. So in my workplace, I became a trade union caseworker. I do find myself actually working with management in a kind of like a psychoeducational aspect, where I'm trying to simply get managers to adhere to organisational policies, which they need to get changed and updated as well. But I think activism through being in a union certainly has allowed me to take what I think theoretically and also put it into practice. I think it gives you a real insight into what really goes on behind the scenes.
And in the book, you describe this stuff that goes on behind the curtain as, or maybe not behind the curtain, maybe actually out in public, as relational abuse. What does that mean?
What does that mean? I think terms like bullying and incivility, ostracism, scapegoating, passive aggression, the kind of ways in which we use anger in socially acceptable ways in the workplace are all part of this kind of nested array of quite complex ways in which we use relationships to manipulate, coerce, and be punitive and damage people. And I think when you look at the literature on this, there's still quite a lot of difficulty in trying to define what bullying is and so on. But actually, I find it more useful to consider that, emotional aggression or emotional abuse, because that kind of captures a lot of the kind of what I call microaggressions in the workplace. So I conceive it as being like hierarchy. So you have all these kind of interpersonal experiences, and then the middle type nest of emotional abuses, I would say, are things that require it can involve individuals, but it tends to involve kind of groupings such as sexual harassment, discrimination, and then of course at the top of the hierarchy of this pyramid is what I'd call the corruption complex, which is what permits and allows these behaviours to kind of take place. Because, for example, at a micro level, management may well be very unhappy about the fact that scapegoating is going on, but in fact, at a meta level, that's exactly what goes on in management. If you want to belong to the management caste, this is the sort of behaviours that you have to engage in. This is the kind of soft abuses that are part of how we run an organisation. And hierarchies themselves are about a lack of trust. Why else would we, come together as a group of people and organise ourselves in this way? You see it happen in the animal kingdom. You see, the chickens organise themselves in this pecking order, and troops of baboons organise themselves in this sort of arrangements in which control is organized in a way that's downwards, because how else do you get what you want from members of your species or your pack if you can't trust them to give it to you via a process of negotiation? That's what hierarchies are, after all. I just think we're more sophisticated than a troop of baboons. I just think there are other ways of actually interacting and engaging with each other to get what we need from each other. And I guess that's why I'm so focused on relationships.
I think that's really interesting about the corruption complex. I know you talked about it in the book being the misuse of authority and power for personal gain or benefit of the group or the clique. And gosh, we've all seen that, managers doing things to stay in their jobs rather than for the benefit of their people. But then they are being relationally abused from above, and so on.
So I think that the corruption complex thinks about things being unethical but not illegal, and the corruption complex starts right at the very top. Our own Prime Minister, I think it was in November, I think there was a report on one of his ministers that found that she had been a bully. And his reaction was, well, she's a confident manager, and let's ignore that. And so right from the very top, we have this sense that actually bullying serves a purpose. And things like nepotism, which is also, I think, highly problematic and undermining the workplace, because that's about bringing on people that are just like me. So if we want a diverse workplace, we've got to tackle that. If we want a truly diverse workplace, then we've got to stop people giving jobs to people just like them. So it's quite complex what goes on in the corruption complex, but I think it's just beginning to emerge as something that we can use to describe the practices in the workplace that are really problematic and undermining.
Yeah, because we all know that bullying is wrong, right? You mustn't ever discriminate against someone, and you must be civil. And there are some legal definitions of bullying. And I know that you make a really interesting point in the book that the problem is once you start going by the legal definition of it, and you're talking about, is it the MOD has 100 pages on what bullying is and what it's not.
The MOD has a very kind of legalistic description of practices that are not permitted or that transgress what's acceptable in the organisation. And from my experience of people working in like the MOD, it's a great place to work. And other organisations have a much more loose, floppy definition of what it is to be a bully. And that's because management still want to be able to define who the bullies are, because they want to be able to nominate those who use the positional power to control others. And that makes it quite hard to challenge. Before we started the podcast, you were talking about how organizations as a whole can be the bully. So how do we tackle that? How do we challenge that? And we have to do that as a collective. A relational approach is about recognizing that we need to behave and act as a collective in order to be able to challenge organizational power, because it's really hard to do individually.
Yeah, it's really difficult. The definition of bullying, we can all get behind and say, that is not right. And organisations have a legal responsibility, sort of duty to address it. But
Yeah.
when you talk about relational abuse, it's so much wider, and it includes all those things that are really insidious and cause almost as many problems as
Yeah.
bullying, but they are sort of acceptable.
So, for example, you have a group of colleagues, and say two of them are kind of by their nature, anxious about the future and want to exert a little bit of control over their peers, and they can collude in order to create a power base within the group, and act as a pair in order to exert power over others, to perhaps ostracize, to perhaps undermine, to control others, to perhaps undermine people in a different context in order to degrade their professional standing. Say somebody they want to have a stay-at-home day because work is just too stressful, and there may well be structural reasons for that. For example, the work rota has been arranged really badly, and someone has just had, a large run of nights. They've got a young family. They just need some time off. Well, actually, they behaved in a very normal way to kind of abnormal circumstances. Now, the way that that is actually framed by other colleagues or senior colleagues could be such and such one is sick. Well, this pathologizes that person, doesn't it? It undermines their professionalism, and it puts, if you like, the blame or the onus on that person, and actually deflects attention from what's really going on, because they may be new to the team, because they haven't quite understood how work rotas are organised. They've got all the bum jobs basically, and they're just in danger of burning out. And because the general message is, if you take time off, you're weak, you're not up to the standards, you get sick, you're pathologized, and so nobody else will take time off when they need to. So for example, it can be about creating these myths of invincibility, because I certainly know in the medical profession, as a young student, I used to work in hospitals as a porter, and I would see consultants parading around, and this kind of quite godlike figure of invincibility. It really does intimidate those who want to rise to that position. And so the idea is that if to get to where I am, then you have to take the treatment that I had. It's how I got here. You've got to go through that as well. So there's this kind of relational abuse that the only way you can get to this level is to be abused in the way that I was. Well, actually, this is quite similar to the kind of abuse that happens. I do a lot of work with sexual abuse in families, and it's generational. It goes on for generations, the abuse. This is what's normal for me, and this is what I'm going to do to you. I don't see it as wrong. It's just what I'm used to. And don't stop and ask me if it's right or wrong. That's too problematic. And so very often in organizations, you see parallels with abuses from a very serious context. And no one would disagree that sexual abuse in families is wrong and dangerous. But the parallels exist in organizations as well. And in fact, the parallels exist in organizations that investigate sexual abuse, and in organizations that provide counselling to those who have been the target of sexual abuse. The parallel processes of silences and what's kept secret continues, and I guess where I get involved in my consultancy is to say, are you noticing the parallel processes going on here? Are you noticing that what you do professionally plays out in your relationships with each other as well? So I'm not sure if that's kind of really nailed it down enough, but when I see what happens between two people, I always see it in the context of what is permitted, what sort of behaviours are presented to you as normalising behaviour. And I think when I talk to colleagues and friends who work in the medical profession, the expectations of the fact that you put the ideal masculine employee first, because I talk in the book a lot about how we organise work, and work intrinsically, structurally, is based upon the idealized man who can devote himself to the workplace for 40 years. And because he's a man, he doesn't have to reproduce. That's all behind the scenes. All right. That's just structurally how we organize work. And it still goes on until we begin to make real structural changes, like men take their paternity leave, and a lot of it. That's what we really have to do in terms of gender equality in the workplace and making the workplace, more friendly for people who are not men, quite frankly.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. When you were talking about, this is how we've always done it. It happened to me, therefore it's going. And you excuse it. I was just thinking. In the book, you talk about, bullying and how we need to change our language, and how we often, there's the bully and then there's the victim, which is very difficult then for you to admit that you're the victim or whatever. And you talk about, actually, we should call it the perpetrator and the target. And some of the euphemisms that people say about the perpetrator and the target, I just like to read some out because I think they're fascinating. And I'm sure I've been called a lot of these. Are overly sensitive, can't take a joke, one of life's natural victims, bit of a loner, perhaps not a team player, bit of a maverick, outsider. So if you don't fit in, you're not a team player. And you might not be fitting in because you don't fit the gender or the culture, or you're refusing to join in with the bad behaviour, or has an attitude problem or a troublemaker. Now, I've certainly been called that when I have raised concern. And then about the perpetrator, interestingly, like you said, and whilst you were talking about, these two people getting into an alliance and making it difficult for the rest of the team, I can just, hear hospital doctors all around the country going, my department. I've seen it. The perpetrator is a forceful, strong, straight talker. They're a robust personality, has an unfortunate manner, but they're they're a good person. It's just their manner's unfortunate. So just put up with that. Doesn't suffer fools gladly. Not a people person. Hard taskmaster. Old school. Old school runs a tight ship. I just thought, oh my goodness. And we accept all of that. That is fine.
Bully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bullies. And actually, I think I was in a mediation once. The manager, who was a hard taskmaster, was talking to the person who was the target, and he said, "Your bullies, I will hunt them down, but there'll be no bullies." In fact, in his the way he was thinking about dealing with bullies, he was actually being quite bullying as well. He wants to bully the bullies, and he can't escape that cycle. But I also recognise that bullying is a behaviour and not something essential to the person, because ordinarily when you're working as a psychotherapist, you're always thinking carefully about boundaries. But during one stage of my career as a workplace counsellor, hospital setting, it was after about 12 sessions with two people, I realised that actually I was talking to the perpetrator and the target. Right, and they had been talking about each other in sort of quite general terms. They presented all the materials, and they were talking about people in their lives that they found quite difficult. But it occurred to me that actually these two people were talking about each other. One was the bully, one was the perpetrator. The person who was the bully had no idea they were a bully. They would not have recognised that epithet. But the person experiencing these behaviours certainly felt like they were being emotionally abused. I have to admit, that realisation only came to the fore that when the work ended in the supervision session. I wasn't working with them knowing that. But then it reminded me that the turning point for the person who didn't recognise a bully was when they thought about a period in their life, when a very painful period in their life, when someone who's very popular that they want to be friends with, it systematically ignored them and ostracized them, and it occurred to them just how painful that was, and yet the person who was ignoring them had no idea. So it can be a complex dynamic, because very often people's behaviour, then they're not aware of the impact, and they may not even be aware of why they're doing it. But then I came to the conclusion, well, does it matter? I don't think it does. What matters is the subjective experience of the person who is the target, because all in all, we're not always aware of the impact of our actions as we go about our daily life. I mean, we can't be. But I think what's really important is to be able to talk about the impact that we have on each other in a way that isn't blaming, because there can be a lot of shame associated with both parts of that dynamic, being the bully and being the target. The word victim is highly problematic because, particularly for men, where the masculinity is really about being autonomous and strong and so on. Very often, men who are the targets will suffer silently for a very long time. And let's face it, if a man is being bullied by a woman, he is less likely, in my experience, to do something about it than do the way around. So I think whilst there is a systemic aspect to this as well, I I I think bullies themselves, people who engage in bullying behaviour, may not always necessarily be aware, but I think that doesn't matter. I think it's about bringing the impact of your behaviour to the attention of others, and this does require not a punitive approach to bullying, which is the one I described of the manager who wants to go around bullying the bullies, but actually it does require a kind of compassionate, relational approach. And in the book, in the other chapters of the book, I do talk about what a relational sort of approach, really looks like. So, it's not a theoretical, philosophical sort of argument. It's bound in the practices therapists engage in, but in secret in their rooms, and so it never really gets out. Never gets out. I think we know all this great stuff, but we don't get it out, and that's also a reason why I wrote the book and engage in a lot of kind of training and that kind of stuff.
In a minute, I'm going to come on and ask you a bit about this compassionate approach and what bits that we as non-psychotherapists can adopt. First of all, I want to play a little bit devil's advocate, because I think often bullying behaviour stems from the bully themselves having pressure on them from management to achieve certain things. And I know that in the NHS, we are really scared of performance management, really scared of it. I'm thinking of a colleague who's in a line management responsibility. There's somebody who's been not doing their job on their team, and they probably it hasn't been addressed when it should have been addressed, and now they've had to raise it, give them some improvement targets, things like that. The first thing that this person did is turn around and put in an accusation against them, the bullying.
So this is a sort of dynamic I see a lot, because I think performance management can be seen as a very sort of punitive, exposing, and shameful process. When in the point being, it's got too far down the line and then needs something more formal. When in fact a lot of the work I do as a trade unionist is about de-escalating, winding things back, and making sure that the informal process, a supportive informal process, has taken place. And yes, I know people are busy and they don't notice things, and things drift, and they feel they need to take action because they themselves are concerned about being in the spotlight. But I spend so much of my time engaging in de-escalation and getting people back into being relational, because very often, if things aren't going for someone well at work, there's going to be reasons for it. Nobody enjoys not contributing effectively to their team, and nobody enjoys. People enjoy working well with their colleagues. Work is good for us, and when work is good for us, we are happier. We are more content. All the research evidence shows it. I think Freud said it. He said that the purpose of life is to love to work, and so it's de-escalation. And when that hurt and that pain gets triggered, and we reach for our holsters, then not only does that create a huge amount of workload for people like me and HR professionals, because we work very closely with HR professionals, that creates a huge amount of workload for us, and de-escalation really is absolutely key. So I don't know if that helps, but certainly that's what I spend most of my time doing, which is taking the heat out of stuff. Because people get shame is one of those emotions in the workplace, and I think I talk about the big three emotions in terms of attachment theory in the book, which are fear, anger, and shame. And shame is massive. It can trigger a lot of behaviors, because shame is also the fear of being ostracized, and we're human beings, we're pack animals. If we feel like the pack wants us to try to kick us out, that's an existential threat. We are part of a pack. We need to belong to the pack, and the workplace and our teams are safety packs.
Yeah. So you're saying that, if you do have to undergo performance management with someone, then spend a lot of time understanding where they're coming from, offering informal support before you then have to go down that route, and it's less likely to escalate.
Yes, I mean, don't get me wrong. I I have been through that process myself. I mean, I'm a trade unionist and a psychotherapist, and I myself have had to lead somebody out of the organisation that worked for me, and it was a very painful process. But at every opportunity where the hand of help and support was offered, it was rejected. You can offer help and you can be supportive, but if there's no engagement, then that's really
Yeah.
difficult to work with. So I'm not some kind of wishy-washy liberal who thinks that the workplace is some kind of a soiree. Actually, but I think with compassion and support, we can avoid a lot of these things escalating. Yeah.
So, yeah, I never want to accuse you of being a wishy-washy liberal.
Oh, okay. Well,
That would be
I'm
dreadful, wouldn't it?
obviously nervous about that.
Um, in a minute, we're gonna come on to actually what you can do. How can you offer a compassionate approach? What can you do about some of this? But I did just want to touch on a few more examples of relational abuse, and particularly gaslighting, because this for me was like, oh yes, and I think I can see this going on in the NHS at the moment. This may be a bit that I'm too nervous to put out on the podcast, but I have seen a lot of anti-speaking up stuff going on. That happened to me in my workplace. And this might not be gaslighting, this might just be sort of emotional abuse. I've seen at the moment failure to protect our colleagues in medicine from abuse in the media,
Right.
failing to speak up and protect them. I'm seeing people being told they have no choice but to work. I'm seeing blaming the providers of care rather than the commissioners, the lack of funding. So you don't give enough money or resources to the people who've got to provide care. And then when they can't provide the care, you blame them. And yeah, a lot of that sort of stuff going on. And I think it's causing widespread anger. And people are sort of saying, that's enough. We can't carry on, and then they're maybe being accused of being paranoid, or being weak or overreacting, and all those sorts of things. And I just wondered if those were examples of relational abuse or not.
Oh well, that's really fascinating. I think I'm not quite sure who said it. We treat, but God cures. There's some idea around recognizing that in the medical profession you're not super men and women, and you don't have power over life and death, and yet the expectations are really high in your profession. The expectation of your profession is really high, and I think that message, very medical science is fantastically successful, but that message that hang on, we're not gods, we can treat, and we can do that within a limited resource envelope, and we care, but also from your organization to get that message out, to be supported in recognizing that actually there's only so much can be done with the resources we have. And if we want more from the NHS and from our practitioners, we need to pay more tax. At the very beginning, was it Nye Bevan had to concede that, okay, we've got to pay for prescriptions because they can't be free. Right from the beginning, it was recognised that this was a fantastic dream, but we have to be realistic about what we can offer. And I think that message doesn't always get across. The last year has been an extraordinary year politically in terms of what the NHS means to us.
So can I ask you about gaslighting? Because it's different spectrums. It's one thing being bullied, then you've got relational emotional abuse, and then gaslighting is this insidious thing that makes you think it's your fault, or is it your fault? So just remind us what gaslighting is.
Well, I think the best introduction to this, because I wanted to go back to basics. I wasn't able to go and see the play The Gaslight, but it's a wonderful film from 1943, I think, Ingrid Bergman. And so I thought I can watch this film as part of my research for the book. Yes, I'm very dedicated. And so anyway, some chap decides that he wants to get hold of Ingrid's diamonds, and so he marries her. They have a whirlwind romance, And then what he wants to do then is to try and undermine her sense that she understands the world around herself correctly. He begins to undermine her sense that she knows herself and that she is able to make emotional choices and decisions in a way that she can trust. So actually, what he does is something which is the anathema of being a psychotherapist, which is undermining a person's capacity to trust in themselves. Because if you stop trusting yourself, then it's as a moral agent, as a thinking person, how do you then make decisions about the world? You've been told by everyone around you that actually you're just reading it wrong. You got it wrong. And the film has got some wonderful quotes or the kind of things that can serve to that project to undermine someone's capacity. So, for example, suggesting it's you're like a child. I think if like a child you misunderstand the situation. I think that's a direct quote from the film. Or things that I've actually heard from practice, which is, well, actually, I think you're quite difficult. You're quite a difficult person, aren't you? Or you're quite sensitive. In fact, it's become a thing now. I think in some branches of psychology, which is like sensitivity, which is somebody who just takes the world a bit too seriously, and that's a pathology, which is really worrying. So I've worked with people in the NHS who have asked me, "Am I too sensitive?" I've been told I'm too sensitive. It's like a pathology. Well, this is just bullshit to undermine your sense that what's going on around you is so you're sick, you're unwell. Yeah, are you all right? You're having a hard time. You find it difficult right now. It's very invidious, and it slowly undermines the fact that actually you're a thinking moral agent who knows what's going on and can make decisions for yourself and recognizes when things are wrong. And it undermines your confidence in then being able to challenge because you think, am I right here? And I hear it so very many times when I'm working with people. Am I being? Is this bullying? Is what bullying feels like? Is it? Is this? Yes, it is. In my experience, the only way to kind of get around that is to what I call triangulate. So if you're isolated in your experience, as Ingrid Bergman was, then you will start to doubt your capacity to make sense of the world. But for Ingrid Bergman, ironically, it was a Mr. Cameron who came to her rescue.
There is an irony.
Yes, so Mr. Cameron comes to Ingrid's rescue and says, "Hey, this guy is pulling the rug from under you. He's trying to get hold of your diamonds, and I'm going to rescue you. Off we go." And there's an element of that in the dramatic arc that actually applies also to the workplace, which is triangulating your experience by talking to others about your experience. And sometimes actually getting the evidence for bullying is really difficult and slippery because bullies make sure there's no audience. This is something they learn to do as kids as a way of manipulating and coercing people. Don't do it when there's someone around who can see what you're doing. So it very often happens in one-to-one interactions, and the person just changes. They become someone else. They become this alter ego, and then you have no, where's your reference point for this? It's very often so disorientating and confusing that you can't make sense of it for days afterwards. What's happened? So I think what's really important is to triangulate the experience, and that means getting others involved, people that you trust, getting them involved in checking out your experience. And I think this is where relationships, which I talk about in the book, like mentoring, informal mentoring. Yes, I mean, I'm a trade union caseworker, so very often my role is also about these informal conversations. What would you call this? What do you think this is about? What is this like? And so I think it's a triangulation. Don't be isolated in it. And get help, because I think that's what the bully relies on, that you're going to be so confused and disorientated, you just become demoralized and leave.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because, if you put in a complaint said, I'm being bullied because they said I was really sensitive. But it's until you start to, get some sense checking. Am I sensitive, like you said? And is that what's really happening? And can you see it happening? And I think part of the problem is, certainly in healthcare, is that, like you said, that sometimes the bullies really know that they're bullies and they're doing it on purpose, but actually sometimes they don't know. And Do you think it's possible to gaslight someone else without knowing that you're doing it?
Yes, I've wrestled with this philosophical point many times because it's about ethics, isn't it? It's about, if I know my action is wrong, then I'm wrong. If I don't know my action is wrong, is it right? So, but actually, having played around with that conundrum for a long time, I think, do you know what? It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether somebody has 50 hours of therapy with me to examine their relationship with their absent father or their overbearing mother and their a sibling that was disinterested or bullying themselves. What does it matter if after 50 sessions we get to the bottom of it? Actually, what matters is the experience of the person as the recipient. So that sounds a bit kind of cold, I think, but actually we need to stop the bullying at the point of contact,
Mm.
and whether somebody knows or needs therapy or needs to work it out.
Yeah.
Do you know?
And it's really difficult, isn't it? Like you said, it's so multifactorial. That person might be bullied themselves. They might be in a really difficult environment where they are held accountable for things that they have no control over. So they're trying to exert control over you. There's all that stuff. But what I did find interesting was you then talked about if you're being relationally abused or you're being gaslighted at work or working in these difficult cultures, you then have to increase the emotional labour that you're doing.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, this is an idea that came out in the 70s that as the type of work we do changes, we've gone from lifting things and pulling things, that the kind of work we do is more relational. If you think about work in a coffee bar, actually, your job isn't just about making coffee, it's about engaging in relationships with people that sometimes can be quite rude or abusive, and not everybody is as polite, as grateful as I am when they buy coffee, particularly these days. But I think it's then being able to process that. Your reaction may well be to say, "How dare you treat me like that? What a terrible way to treat. Bugger off and do that somewhere else." These minor sort of indignities are actually part of the emotional workload of doing that job. Going to work all day and being ignored, that's not nice, is it? So, and I think in other professions like the medical profession, this idea of bedside manner, it's an old idea, isn't it? But actually, that's the emotional layer of, yes, it may well be the 20th, 30th person you've seen that week with this particular malady, but it's actually presenting yourself as this is the first time ever met this issue. And having to do that takes a huge amount of emotional labor. So, yes, the idea of emotional labor, particularly in your profession, is profound. It's profound because people look to you for hope when they're frightened, when they're in despair. And you've got to, there's your technical abilities, but also you've got to offer something else. And surely, doing that all the time, it's got to take a toll. You need nourishment and to be replenished.
And I guess, as a healthcare professional, that you do see that's part of your job, being able to deal with angry, distressed, upset, cross patients. And there are a lot of them at the moment.
Yes.
For reasons that are completely outside our control. And then you've got to then add in the emotional labour of dealing with the relational abuse that's occurring in the culture as well, which is a layer that would be really nice if that wasn't there. I know you talk about this sort of relational approach. I can't recommend this book highly enough to people. If you're interested in this, please get the book. There's so much in there. But what principles would you really like people to take away?
Okay, so there's a really interesting piece of research done 20 years ago about what works in psychotherapy. What works? And, I originally trained as an organic chemist. I originally started off in higher education as an organic chemist. So I really am interested in what works. And so are you, in the medical profession, what works? And so this piece of research looked at what works, what creates a therapeutic change when someone goes for psychotherapy. What helps people flourish? What helps people grow? And the research is really interesting. It was shown that about 15% of what works is just a placebo effect. Yeah.
Okay.
I believe this will heal me. And 40% is associated with just all the other stuff goes on outside, because when you come for therapy, it's only 1 hour of your week. There's a whole bunch of other stuff
Yes.
that can change outside and does change. And this term resilience is about our capacity to bounce back from tough times with our family and our friends, dogs, pets, you name it. A vanishingly small factor is associated with actual technique, right? It's quite depressing for people who write books about technique, but that hardly matters. What really matters is what's called the common factors, and that's about 30%. The common factors are what's common to a relationship that creates a safe space for somebody to flourish and develop. And this sort of relationship is quite unique because very often we don't get it after our relationship with our mother. And even then, it's only, not all of us are that fortunate to be able to get from others unconditional positive regard. I should say father as well, father, whoever the carers are, it doesn't matter. Unconditional positive regard. I love you just because you exist. And when I look at my children, I love them just because you exist. So just positive regard, empathy. What's it really like being you? I'm interested in what does the world look like from your perspective, and authenticity, being real. Now, these common factors are what the book is about, and so that's what I'm suggesting in the book as well, that we can all try this. We can all simply put ourselves aside for a moment and be interested in what's going on for you, and not waiting for a gap so I can tell you about my day. It's about responding really, really authentically to what's going on for you. What does that do for me? You feel like you're being bullied. That really bothers me that you're being bullied. And I feel a bit angry as well. I feel angry because very often people forget to be angry about the fact that they're being bullied. They just feel scared. So being authentic is about also really checking in with what that does for you. And unconditional positive regard, it's not about what you do, because I come back to this kind of challenge about thinking about, is a bully a bad person? No, a bully is someone who's hurting. They're in pain. At some level, there's a stone in their shoe, and it hurts every time they walk. And the size of the stone changes, but that's all. We've all got stones in our shoes, and I think it's about having compassion about working with that. I may have sounded compassionless towards bully earlier on in our conversation, but we behave in ways that we know we want to be treated because we're hurting for some reason. So that's effectively the relational approach.
Yeah, every behaviour, there's an underlying need, isn't there? That is probably unexpressed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I guess if you apply that, whether you're the most junior person in the organisation, whether you're middle management, whether you're running the organisation, if you apply those three principles running through it like it's DNA, then you're probably not going to go far wrong.
Well, am I searching for utopia? The thing with searching for utopia is that once you've reached utopia, then you're going to have to put some system in place to keep utopia. So you're going to have to then turn into a totalitarian regime. So, it's philosophically difficult, but certainly I'm not looking for utopia. I'm looking for people to just be a little bit more aware that if someone behaves badly, could be because they're hurting, to have compassion for that person, and to just withhold judging what they're up to for a little longer than you would normally do so. And that's a relational approach. It's not complicated, I think, but to put in practice, it's hard.
It's really hard, and we work in such complex organisations and with such complex motivations and things like that. But I mean, that's just been so fascinating. It's really opened my eyes to stuff, and I think I'll be approaching things very, very differently, really, and hopefully with a little bit more compassion. If you had 3 top tips for someone who feels that they are being bullied or gaslighted or suffering relational or emotional abuse in their workplace, what would you say to them?
Okay, well, certainly the first one is to check out with a trusted colleague or friend and triangulate. And triangulate means, 3 or 4, square 8, I'm not sure is a word, but check out with others who know you and just calibrate what's going on, because actually being the target bullying is about your experience. Okay, point 1. Point 2, you make contact. That person could be HR, so it's a point 2, could be point 1 as well. Make contact either with a trade union representative, a caseworker, somebody who may well understand the context of what's going on and talk to them. And also, it could be you need to look after yourself as well. So you may need to look after yourself by talking to somebody who's not connected to your family and so on, because actually save family time for restoring and recuperating and feeling better. And very often organizations have employee assistance programs that sometimes are very good. And blow off some steam and talk to a professional and spare your family from it. Because actually, when you're being bullied, it can preoccupy yourself, you can feel miserable, and it detracts. Don't bring it home. Park it with a therapist. And you don't have to be, this is the whole thing, you don't have to be sick. It's not about being sick. It's about finding somewhere to blow off steam that's not your family or your friends. And that's what we're for, because then we blow off steam up to our supervisors, and eventually there's some kind of huge cosmic chimney through which the world's pissed offness gets blown out into another dimension.
I just got this thing in my mind of this, and what if this great cosmic chimney accidentally collapses and falls down and all blasts towards one particular profession, which at the moment I think is general practice, but we're not going to talk about that. Yes, that is really, really helpful advice, Jim. I think I would add to that, we're going to done a full circle, add to that when you say looking after yourself and getting help and pay attention to your own well-being, because if you're not looking after yourself, it's just much, much harder to do that emotional labour and to cope with whatever's going on in the workplace.
Yeah, which is why, apples and bicycles, they do have their place, but that is not alone the answer. Well, I think we've solved that one. That's chapter 7 done.
Brilliant. Okay.
But I've really enjoyed today, Rachel. It's been absolutely tremendous fun. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And I hope if there's people who have done me the great service of actually listening to this, that I hope it's helped a bit.
I think it'd be really, really helpful. I think there's many, many people around who just had their eyes opened by that. So thank you so much for being on. And Jim, if people wanted to contact you, either pick your brains or for consulting or for anything, how can they best get hold of you?
I have a homepage on the university website. My name's James Costello, and I've also got an email address, james.costello@uwe.ac.uk. And also I've started a consultancy with my colleague Andy Chambers. And Andy came from a different sector. He came from the city, where I think ideas of what it is to be a human being didn't really fit. And so we became concerned about, what it's like being a parent and combining it with work. And this ties in a lot with what we talk about today. So we're called Born Human, and the website.
Brilliant. So we'll put all those links in the show notes. So do get in contact with James. And thank you so much. Will you come back on another time?
Oh, well, I think we've only just got started, really. I think the philosophy of death and dread, is going to be a real ringer. Want to do that one?
Yeah, death and dread. Right.
Kierkegaard. Oh, yes. Let's do the whole postmodern. Yeah.
Wow. Right. Well, I'm looking forward to that one.
It's been lovely speaking to you, Rachel.
Thanks, James. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.